that would be amazing, just to reduce the background noise, so that we can all benefit from the session tonight. The session is being recorded, so please be mindful of this. Share what you're comfortable if you plan on sharing with the audience. Mute or turn off your mic if that's more comfortable for you. So just letting you know that the session is being recorded. Accessibility is important to us. So as you can see, we do have closed captioning, subtitles available. And we're happy to be able to do that. And also the recording will be shared with everyone, so that if you do want to watch the recording again, stop, rewind, focus on parts that, are particularly resonant for you, you can do that after the session as well. On the bottom of your screen, for those of you who may be new to Zoom, you'll see a chat window. If you could please click on that right now, that would be awesome. And this is where we would love for you to interact with us throughout the next hour and a half by sharing comments, questions for our speakers. And right now, I would love for you, if you're comfortable, to put your name and where you're joining us from, or a handshake or a hello, so that we have a feel for who's in the room and to make sure that everyone's comfortable using the chat. So I'll give you a quick second to do that. We've got Jean from Mississauga. Hello, welcome back. Ryan, Lisa. So we've got Welland, amazing. We've got Brampton in the house. Awesome, Chris, great to see you. Amazing, so we have quite an awesome group. And again, we want you to be interactive. I'd like to turn it over to Cole, who will be hosting tonight, as well as Simi, my colleagues. If you could please introduce yourselves as well, that would be great.
Hi, my name is Cole Arnett. I am the Client Experience Intern at Edge. I assist with a lot of the programming that we host here at Edge, and I'm excited for all of you to be here and enjoy the part one of our grant writing and IRP preparedness session. I think it's been great. We have Bethany Osborne and Ryan Knighton here, who are both amazing, amazing facilitators and can help you out really, really well. So glad to have you here, and I'll pass it on to Simi.
Hi everyone, I'm Simi. I'm the new administrative specialist with Edge, and I'm really excited to hear tonight's facilitators talk about this grant session, part one, and I'm just excited with all of you just to see how today goes.
Awesome, thank you, Simi. So today is day 4 for her, and we're very happy to have you on board. If we can go to the next slide, please. So for those of you who may not be as familiar with us, Edge is Sheridan's home for entrepreneurship and change making, and we focus on acting as a bridge into and out of Sheridan, into our community. We focus on connecting entrepreneurs to the incredible creativity and innovation expertise within Sheridan, with our faculty, people like Bethany, as well as with our members and people in the community like Ryan and others. And we also work to ensure that entrepreneurship supports are available, and we know an inclusive approach to entrepreneurship really has the power to positively impact the economy and society. If we could go to the next slide. So basically, in terms of what we do, we support aspiring entrepreneurs and change makers, and these are Sheridan students, Sheridan faculty and staff, as well as entrepreneurs within the community. We provide training like this session, mentorship, when we were pre-COVID, a workspace and co-working space, as well as support and access to various funding opportunities. We again serve a very broad community of students, alumni, staff, and of course the broader Peel and Halton and beyond community as well. If we can go to the next slide, please. Our areas of focus are quite broad. We focus on creativity as a creative campus, as well as human-centered design, foundational to our work. We really pride ourselves on being an inclusive community in how we work and in representation of our membership and who we serve, as well as we're very proud to have a focus on entrepreneurship and change making, which means that we do focus on social innovation and ensuring that we support social impact entrepreneurs within our community as well. If we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So very proud of our partners and supporters from Sheridan itself, to the work that we do with iCube at UTM, with some programming that we offer in collaboration with them, as well as others you see on the slide that have been supportive of ours. And I'll be speaking to the Investment Readiness Program, as will Bethany, Ryan, and Sneha, my colleague, in a second. And actually, I'm going to have Sneha introduce herself too. And if you can talk a little bit about the Investment Readiness Program when we get to that slide. But Sneha, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, that would be awesome.
Hi everyone, my name is Sneha and I'm the Client Experience Coordinator at EDGE, and I'm also the representative for the IRP in our region. So if you're a not-profit, cooperative, social enterprise, for-profit, and you have any questions about the IRP, I'd be more than happy to help you. And I can give my contact information later on as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Sneha, I'm going to come back to you on our slides for the IRP, if you can maybe talk a little bit at that point as well. All right, if we could please roll forward. Again, for those that may not be as familiar with our programming, we offer different programs for entrepreneurs and change makers at different stages of the venture development process, from Explore, which is focused on generating ideas, exploring entrepreneurship, to Leap, which is I have an idea, it's defined, and I want to validate the idea. So whether that's through primary research of talking to many, many people, having a biased action, and secondary research. And from there, further validating through our Rise level program, so building on a foundation and that initial traction that an entrepreneur may see into developing minimal viable product and starting to build teams, to Soar, which is now where we've commercialized and we are focused on growth and building further traction and scaling. So the numbers that you see below are a little bit older, from 2009, but to give you an idea, last year we served more than 3,500 participants across 140 plus different programming and training that we offer. All right, if we can go to the next, I'm going to pass it on to Sneha, who can maybe share a little bit more about the Investment Readiness Program and the funding that's open right now, the call.
Sure. Okay, so the Investment Readiness Program was an initiative by the Government of Canada, and it was to provide social purpose organizations with non-repayable capital in order to move them towards investment readiness. So that basically means to help them with projects that would help them accept future investment in readiness for the Social Finance Fund. So the first round of the Investment Readiness Program was last year, and so we awarded 23 social purpose organizations with $715,000 in our region. So that means like the Brant, Halton, and Peel partnership. And so right now we are asking for applications again. Applications opened on September 8th, and they will close on October 9th. And across Canada, over $50 million in federal funding will be allocated to social purpose organizations through both rounds of the IRP. There have been a couple information sessions, preparatory sessions to help people make good applications. And it's really an opportunity to support the social purpose organizations in our region to become revenue generating, to accept investment in future, and to move their organizations forward. And if there's any questions about that, or if you're working on your application already and you need to, you want to just bounce ideas off of someone, I'm more than happy to chat with anyone who's interested. And I can drop my email in the chat.
That's awesome, thank you. And Ryan, Bethany, and Sneha, for those of you that are working on your application for our working group session that you can register for through the same Eventbrite that you registered for this session. So you can register for our first working group if you haven't already. It runs next Wednesday from 5 until 6:30 p.m. And again, Bethany, Sneha, and Ryan will be there as well. And we'll talk more about that towards the end of the session. All right, so we're ready to rock on to the next slide. So it's without further ado, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Dr. Bethany Osborne with an E at the end of the end. So sorry for dropping the E, as well as Ryan Knight for collaborating with us through ACBN to bring this programming to our members in the community. So Dr. Bethany Osborne is an innovative community practitioner, educator, and researcher with over 20 years of experience building and engaging diverse communities. Over her career, she's worked with diverse organizations, enjoying a key role in supporting community transformation through innovative and creative program and project design, grant writing, of course, and working with community leaders to develop dynamic projects that affect social change. And she's also contributing, engaged, amazing member of the Sheridan community, and we're very proud to have her here tonight. Ryan Knight is a serial social entrepreneur who's passionate about building inclusive, sustainable, and resilient communities using social enterprise as a tool. He is the founder of Detailing Knights and ACBN Canada. Detailing Knights is a B Corp certified waterless mobile car cleaning company that uses a student franchise model to teach entrepreneurship to local at-risk youth. And ACBN Canada holds monthly networking events and business building workshops to help solidify the foundation of local minority-owned businesses to ensure they're sustainable and continue to grow. Thank you both. Thank you to participants, and I'm going to pass it over to Bethany.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Gulnaz. It is a pleasure to be here with you this evening. This is the second time that I've had the pleasure of being here at Edge, and it's always wonderful to meet the different people who find their way to Edge and bring with them the incredible passion that is connected to the different projects and the different ideas that they are involved in. It's today I have the privilege of talking to you in the first of two workshops, and Gulnaz shared with you that there are a couple of workshops. Today we're going to talk about developing a funding strategy and telling a compelling story, and we've connected that into, as Gulnaz shared, some really practical work on the IRP applications if you're interested in doing that. And workshop number 2, which will happen next Thursday at this time, that the practical looking at your actual application would happen on Wednesday. And then next Thursday, we'll actually talk about your budget and developing your work plan. So pulling all of those pieces together to make a really strong funding application. We're going to look at developing today a fundraising strategy and what it is that makes a compelling story. And then today we'll also look at what it is that will make sorry about that. Sometimes this gets ahead of me. We'll actually take a pardon this. We'll actually take a look at drafting your own fundraising strategy and your project story. And if we have time at the end of our session today, we'll take a look a little bit at some of the things that have changed in the whole area of fundraising and grant writing in the age of COVID-19. So by the end of this workshop, you should be able to discuss the elements of an effective funding strategy, be able to apply the elements of an effective funding strategy to your own context, to be able to identify the different steps to create a strong funding application, to identify different components that make a compelling story, and to draft some of the components of your funding strategy and of your project story. sound like a lot? Well, we can. I really truly believe that we can do this in the time that we have together. So, when we think about the different sources of funding that are available for social enterprises, there are a number of different funding sources. So if you take a look at the list that's on the slide in front of you, you see grants, incubators, corporate funding, impact investors, foundations, crowdfunding, angel investors, competitions, loans. Are there things that you recognize up here? Are there things that you have participated in, or things that you have received before as part of funding your own social enterprise? This would be something that you could actually enter into the chat. Are any of these things that you recognize, or things that you've participated in some way in the past? So I'm having trouble seeing the chat.
We'll read them for you, Bethany. So
Sure.
we have, let's see here, Ryan, competitions, grants, crowdfunding, Somia, crowdfunding, grants, loans, and others. Feel free to type your experience with some of these options. We have grants.
Okay.
So grants seems to be grants, incubators.
Okay. So I think
competitions as well.
So different competitions. So those are a number of the things that, so all of these things make up sources of funding for social enterprises. And at different points, when you're at different points in your funding strategy, and as you're thinking about where you're at in terms of your particular project or your particular idea, all of these things make up what might be a part of your funding strategy. And it's important to, when you're even thinking about, many of you may be here today because you're thinking specifically about the IRP, because that particular grant deadline is looming in the very near future. But as part of developing your funding strategy, you may want to think about what needs to be part of my strategy. And often, as part of one grant application, a funder will want to know, where have you applied before? What are your future plans for funding? What are your other, what is the bigger picture for you as you think about funding your particular idea or your particular project or your enterprise? And so it's important to think broadly about sources of funding and potential sources of funding.
Bethany, can I stop you there? I'm very sorry to interrupt. I was just going to refer it to Ryan. We have a question about what is IRP. And before we move further, I'm going to have Ryan and Sneha maybe just define it one more time so that everyone's on the same page. Thank you.
Oh yeah, sure, of course.
Yeah, just before Sneha goes into depth, so it does stand for the Investment Readiness Program, and it's the program that the government has now created, and it is a grant, so it's non-repayable, and helping social enterprises get ready to obtain additional funding. And I did want to ask really quickly, for anybody on the call right now, if this is your first grant that you are writing, please put 1 into the chat, and then I'll explain why. I just wanted to know that later. But Sneha, you can go deeper into the IRP.
Great. Thanks so much, Ryan. That's great.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good summary of it. You can apply for up to $100,000 for funding of your organization. But as Bethany will talk about probably later on, you're probably not making a $100,000 ask, but it really is to help social enterprises and social purpose organizations move their organization forward to in the future accept investments and just set them up for success. And I'm going to drop in the links for the for the Investment Readiness Program if anyone wants to read more about it as well.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Sorry, I didn't. That's great. I'm glad that you asked a question. Sometimes we throw around different terms, and it's always important to ask a question if you don't understand what an acronym stands for. When there was one survey that was conducted in 2016 that looked at social enterprise funding sources, and as someone who is both a practitioner and someone who's an academic, I always think that looking at some of the sources that are out there and looking at research that's been done can often be helpful to look at how have people been funded in the past, particularly when it's a Canadian-based source. So in this particular survey that was done, which was the National Social Enterprise Sector Survey Report 2016, and I have included all of the links to anything that I refer to in this presentation at the end. So you'll be able to connect to it, and that all of this information is included in the Google Doc, the Google folder that I've created as well. So 49%, so government grants are actually a very large source of funding for social enterprises. So the IRP is actually would fall into, so 49% of grants come from federal governments, and so the IRP would actually fall into that category, and 30% would come from provincial and 29% from municipal grants, which would be something like the city of Mississauga, the city of Hamilton, the city of Brampton. Foundations are another source of grants. Corporations offer grants as well, and individuals offer grants. 29% of social enterprises didn't receive grants at all. And then loans were another source of funding from either government, individuals, or banks or credit unions. And 75% of social enterprises received no loans at all. And I give this to you just to kind of give you a sense of the bigger picture in terms of social enterprises and in terms of funding sources. And we're not going to spend our time today, however, talking about the best strategies for each of the different sources. Instead, we're going to spend our time today actually talking about a strategy for developing your story so that no matter where you are applying for funding, you actually have a very strong source to draw from, because depending on your context and depending on your project and your scope, it's going to look a little bit different for every single one of you. But can you think of anything that might be common to all of the different funding sources that we've touched on? What might be important to all of the different funders that we've talked to? And you can enter your answers into the chat. What might be important for funders to know from you as someone who is seeking funding with a really great idea or a really great project? What might they need to know so that they feel confident to give you money?
So they need to know about our project or mission.
Okay, great.
When you were created. What is their primary objective? Who are you targeting and why? Your experience.
Okay.
There was a question earlier about whether they need to know exactly how much you're asking for. So I'm just going to add that to the list.
Yeah,
so
sure.
Potentially a budget and the exact ask.
Yeah.
Your values.
Yep, absolutely. They need to know your values.
I'm going to add the project plan or work back plan.
Oh yeah, they need to know your project plan. Absolutely.
Philosophy.
Yeah, they need
Board
to know.
of directors.
Yeah.
If you're, I guess, budget.
Yep. They need to know a budget. Yeah, those are all, yeah. Wow. I think that there are some people here who could actually be teaching this. Seems like you've all been either writing some applications recently. Yeah, these are all things that are really important. And
we also have one more, Bethany. I just wanted to make sure we capture it. Are you capable of seeing it through? Do you have the skills? And I would probably add, who's the team, right? If there is a team.
Right. And I think that actually that was a really great way, a really great one to end on, actually, because I think that in fact, all of the things that you've talked about actually are contributing to that one piece is, are you actually going to be able to carry it through and see it through? So is your organization, is your project a good project? And is your project, do you have the capacity? So they want to know if your project's a good project, but then also, are you someone who is going to be able to, do you have the capacity to carry this project through? And so by the way you tell your story, that actually tells the funder something about whether or not you're going to be able to do that. That would instill confidence in them. But having a great idea does not necessarily mean that you are someone who's going to be able to carry the project from start to finish. And so I think that's a very, very good point. So there are a few key fundraising strategies that I think are really important. And these key fundraising strategies, I think, connect to some of the things that you were just mentioning in what funders need to know. The first one is developing strategic relationships. The second one is telling your story well. And the third one is to be consistent and organized. So when we think about developing strategic relationships, what I mean when I talk about developing strategic relationships, you need to connect with the person who is actually administering the funds. In this, when I started writing grant proposals, and I'm going to date myself here, 25 years ago, not every grant proposal was applied for online. Things were a lot simpler 25 years ago. But over the last 25 years, the process for applying for grants has, first of all, the pots of money have become less, and the process for applying has become more, I'm not going to say more complicated, but I'm going to say that there are many more administrative levels to ensure that there is accountability, and that's really important. I actually teach a course on grant writing, and we could actually spend much of a whole class talking about some of the historic pieces that contributed to some of those changes. But I won't talk to you about all of those changes now. But one of the things that happened is that funders put in charge of funds people called program managers or grants officers. And in fact, you have already met someone in such a position today, and we have the privilege of having someone in that kind of position who, as part of the webinar today, with the IRP, the Investment Readiness Program, and that is Sneha. And so that is someone who actually, whose job is to connect with people who are applying for grants and to answer their questions, And along the way, you can ask questions about the way that the funding process works. They want to know more about you and your ideas so that they can support you, so that you can write as effective a grant application as possible. Now, what would be, why do you think funders have made the decision to put people in these positions? What would be the advantage of putting people in positions like grants officers or program managers? What would be the value of that for them? Can you think of reasons why that would be important and why they would have made the decision to do that?
I will read the comments as they come in. Nothing's
Yeah,
coming
sure.
yet.
Nothing's coming yet?
No, I think people are just thinking through. It's a great question. Filter inquiries.
Yeah.
Effective execution of their objectives.
Right. Okay. So I think that funders realized that they would get a better quality of applications if they put people in a position to support applicants. And to me, that makes a lot of sense. So if you are putting someone in a position to support applicants, then you're going to get better applications, because that person's job is to ensure that there's a clear understanding of what the process is, a clear understanding of what a good application looks like, and to support people in the process. So it's a win-win situation. And so that's one way to develop a strategic relationship, is to connect with the grants officer or the program manager, as in the example of the IRP. You can invite funders to special events or to meet with volunteers or staff. At this point, everything that we do is happening virtually, but there are actually exciting ways that you can do that in terms of inviting funders to special events or to meet with volunteers and staff in a virtual environment. And why would you invite funders to special events or to meet with volunteers or staff? One of the reasons that you would do that is that there are so many great ideas out there. There are so many people. There are so many possibilities to invest. You want to distinguish yourself and your idea, and you want to provide an opportunity for a potential funder to connect with the impact that your project, the impact of your project, and it also allows your project to speak for itself. And I can tell you that over the years, as I have been someone who has applied for grants, the relationship that I have developed with grants officers or with program managers has been significant, because they have been very supportive in walking me through the process. And I know that that has made me made my applications stronger because of their support. So that's very significant. In fact, I would never consider myself applying for a grant without making a connection with a grants officer or with a program manager. And so this was just an example. There are ways to do that. So sometimes program managers, for an example, with the Ontario Trillium Foundation, if you're a grantee and you actually wish to speak to a program manager, you actually have to call a 1-800 number, and then you can actually, you're actually connected to a program manager. With the IRP, it's very clear who your contact is, and sometimes they even come to webinars and make opportunities for that kind of connection. When you're given an opportunity to learn more, to engage in a process, you want to take advantage of those opportunities, and that's certainly something that all of you are doing in engaging in a webinar that EDGE is doing. These are some more examples of the Oakville Community Foundation's Investment Readiness Program and info sessions that they did earlier this year. And so attending different sessions is one way of developing strategic relationships. When there are things like info sessions, that provides you with an opportunity to make a connection with the people who are administering the grants as well.
Bethany, I just wanted to add that this past August, we also had Wayne Miranda, who was on your list from the McConnell Foundation, run a webinar for EDGE and our community on social finance and investment readiness. So earlier, and I'll put the link in the chat again, we do have a recording of that session on our YouTube page. So for those that want to get more familiar with investment readiness and how it connects to social finance, Wayne does a very, very thorough and excellent job of explaining all of that. So we'll make sure to put the link to that YouTube webinar recording in the chat for you.
That's fantastic. And I mean, the more you make those connections, the better. And even if it doesn't provide for you an immediate connection or an immediate funding, all of this is actually building your network, and you never know when that one connection will make that right connection. You're continuing to build your social capital. So it is all very strategic, and it's really important also for your ideas to get out there and for you to build, I think, a reputation of someone who's willing to learn and willing to put in the time as well. And funders put a lot of effort into putting on educational sessions and webinars together. And so when you attend sessions and you engage in those sessions, it goes a long way into earning you a reputation as someone who's responsible. And frankly, responsible people are the kind of people that funders want to give funding to. So even if it's not immediate, it definitely begins to build your reputation. So the second piece is telling your story well. And I am 100% sure that all of you that are here tonight have a great idea. And you wouldn't be here today if you didn't have a great idea. Because I think that people with great ideas tend to end up at EDGE, and you want to figure out how to grow that great idea. But the one piece is that it doesn't mean that you always know how to communicate it effectively. So one of the things that's important is that you need to think about who your audience is and what they need to know about your ideas so that they can become as passionate about it as you are. Your story also needs to convince them that you have the tools and resources that you need to carry out what you said you will do. And that's one of the things that you've already shared that was important. And that passion, creativity, and innovation need to be partnered with consistency and organization. And that's the bottom line. So somehow in telling your story, all of those things need to be apparent. That's a tall order for telling your story well. But it is possible to tell your story in that way. And when you tell your story, the details need to be well organized so that when someone reads or listens to it, they have a clear picture of what your idea or what your project is. If you're making a funding application, all parts of the funding application need to be consistent. So that means your project outline, your work plan, and your budget need to be consistent, as well as a number of the other things that you covered as well. So your organizational pieces, so your mission, your vision, your values, who your organization is, need to be consistent with your project outline, needs to be consistent with your work plan and your budget. And all of those things need to talk to each other. because that also, the fact that consistency, what that consistency does is that speaks to the funder and tells the funder that that organization is someone who is very responsible, and responsible organization is someone who I could see myself funding.
Oh, and Bethany,
Yeah.
could I just piggyback that?
Oh, please do. Yeah.
Because you touching on somebody is reading your grant application.
Yeah.
And that is the biggest, I feel like, pitfall that a lot of grant writers fall into. And I'm guilty of it as well, where you write as if you know, or as if they know what you know. And you have to understand the grant reviewer is only reading what you put on paper. You don't have a chance to pitch them. And some of us entrepreneurs, when we go to competitions, sure, your business plan isn't on point, but you're able to pitch it and really sell the story. Right. You don't get that opportunity with your grant. Whatever is submitted is typically what they get, and they have to figure it out on their own. So I just wanted to hammer that home.
Yeah, Ryan, you know what? That's so true. The same thing would be true of working with students, or working with like sometimes I will have a student say to me, but I meant to write it, but I say I can't give you marks if it's not on the page. Like I know you knew it, but if it's not there, I can't give you the marks for it.
Yeah, don't leave it in your head.
Yeah, so in your head, like I wanted to give you a higher mark, but I couldn't. And the same thing is true when it comes to a grant proposal. It might have been in your heart and in your head, but if it's not on the paper, I can't give you something for your good intentions. It has to actually be there. So one of the things that in the last decade I have had the privilege of doing is to be someone who actually adjudicates grant proposals, and has had the opportunity to make decisions around funding. And it was always very sad for me when I think, oh my gosh, this application has potential. I know that there is a good idea in here, but this application is all over the place, and I can't give them funding for potential. Like I have to be responsible to the funder. Like it has to be there. It has to be there on the paper.
And one thing that I learned, because I would get really frustrated thinking, why can't they just get this? Why don't they understand what I'm writing? But as a reviewer, you realize that if their application is all over the place, that might be how they actually run the project.
So right.
The way that you present yourself is all that the reviewer has to go with.
Right.
So be consistent, be concise. It's really important.
Right. Those are gems. Thank you both. We have a question from Crystal. Sure. Crystal, do you want to use your mic to ask yourself, or would you like me to read it? It's completely up to you. If you're comfortable speaking to your question, we'd love to hear from you.
So I've got background noise and a really spotty internet connection.
We can hear you.
But I think it's really balancing those items that Bethany was just talking about, right? Is how do we know how much detail, right? For example, talking about the team, we don't give our whole life's, resume. So how do we know, is it depending on how competitive that particular grant is? I guess any guidance would be great. Thank you.
Perfect. And so she's also written, how do we balance being concise and impactful versus like giving the whole story? Like any tips you both have would be great.
Well, I mean, I think that you need to look at what the application is, like what the application is asking. And very often you have no choice but to be concise, because these days, I got to say 25 years ago, grant applications were much longer than they are now. These days, grant applications are quite concise in general. Like you actually can't write more words than you than are allotted on an online application. So you have to think about how can I tell my story in the 150 words that they're giving me, or in the 60 words that they're giving me to tell this, to tell my story. So you need to think about how can I tell my story well? I'm going to a little bit later in our session, I'm going to talk about having a core story or a core narrative that you work from, so that you can pull pieces from your whole story that will actually meet with the funder, a particular funder's questions that they're asking you. And I think that that's a really good strategy that I would use, that I would develop a core narrative so that you can then tailor it to a particular funding application. Is that helpful, Crystal? Does that answer your question?
Yes, I was going to type maybe a summary. So is it that you create your core narrative and you make sure all of those points are somewhere in your application, and you have the fewest amount of points that you need?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Good.
We also have a comment from Ralph. Assume who is reading is not as smart or, I guess, knowledgeable about the subject that you're writing about.
Yes. So the other thing is that you are a subject matter expert in your particular area. And so you cannot assume that everyone who is reading your application is a subject matter expert. In fact, you should assume that they are not. So you should make sure that you are using language that is accessible. And you are telling your story in a way that invites people into your idea and doesn't make them feel like they are excluded from the story just by the language that you're using. Does that make sense?
Awesome, thank you.
Can I just give one example from the IRP applications? There was one question, just about being concise. There's one question that just asked, what is your project? Summarize your project in 2 sentences.
Right.
And many applicants actually summarized their organization, not the project that they were actually requesting funds for. And that was one of the first questions in the application. So right off the bat, the reviewer would be confused. And then you have to do some digging to figure out what is the actual project that you are applying for and not your organization. And when you're confused off the bat, it kind of puts you off a little bit, because you're just like, well, what is this? And then that question is what you go back to every time because you're reviewing so many applications, and you go back to that 2-sentence summary to really like pull together the application. And if that in itself is not clear and concise, then it can hurt the rest of the application, because your reviewer is already confused.
Yeah, great.
These are gems. Please write it down, folks. Read the question carefully, make sure you're answering the question being asked, and the gem about what is your project as opposed to your organization. Thanks, Neha.
You're welcome.
Yeah, that's a great example. Okay, so how do you determine the fit? How do you know where to apply? There are basically 2 ways that people or an enterprise or an organization come to writing a funding proposal. You might have a great idea and you begin to look for funding that might be a good fit for your idea. Or you discover a great funding opportunity and you try to determine how your project might fit the criteria or the scope of the funding. It's one way or the other. Is it better to start one way or another? I actually think that it's probably better to start with option number 1. But the reality is that sometimes timing doesn't work out. There are different deadlines that happen. So sometimes you might not be aware of a fantastic, you might have a great idea, but and you look for funding that might be a good fit for your idea. And unfortunately, the deadline for that funding happened 6 months ago, and it's not going to happen again. But you're looking for funding right now. So you look and you try to figure out how your project might fit the criteria, or how you might work with your project to apply for a particular type of funding. So there are different ways to enter into the application process. You want to make sure that you read through the request for funding proposals or the information package really carefully to determine the fit. If it is not a good fit, don't apply. You want to connect with the grants officer or the program manager and let them know who you are and your intention to apply. You want to talk to them about the fit, and you want to get their recommendations and ensure that you meet the eligibility criteria. It is no small effort to write, to put together a funding package or funding application. And so you want to make sure that your project is going to be a good fit before you embark on a funding application. Before you apply, you want to establish some goals and objectives. So before you even approach potential funders, you want to have a clear picture of the scope of your project or the part of your project that you're going to apply for funding for. You want to know what you want to do and how you're going to do it, and the amount of funding that's required and what the funding will be required for. You don't have to have all of the different pieces completely figured out before you start the application process, but you want to, before you actually start the process, you want to make sure that you have established those things are really clear in your head before you even start the conversation. You want to think about the issue or challenge that you're addressing and how will your enterprise or organization meet that challenge, the kind of research you have to back up or the need for your work. You want to think about the external sources. Have you done any market research? You want to think about your goals. How have you achieved them? Your future. You want to think about your so then you want to start developing your core narrative. And that core narrative is something that I talked about previously. You want to start off with an interesting and easily readable summary sheet, but that's something that you should actually write at the end. And why would you write a summary sheet at the end? Well, you should write a summary sheet at the end because you want to have written your whole narrative first, and then you want to summarize what you've written. You want to prepare an introduction that actually conveys the credibility of your enterprise or organization in a compelling manner. So how long have you been in existence? What have you achieved? And that is different from your actual project. And to Shneha's point, you need to make sure that your organization and your project are differentiated. So what is the issue or challenge you're addressing? How will your organization meet that challenge? What kind of research do you have to back up your work? And then you want to also think about your goals. How have you achieved them? What are your future plans? Who are your target populations? How will your project or idea benefit different populations? Your target population and any other populations, and you want to be specific. How will the world be changed because of your project or idea? How will lives be improved? What do you hope will happen because of the unique contribution your project or idea will make? And when I think about telling a story, one of the things that I think is really important is research. I want you to look at these two phrases here. So you look at number 1 and you look at number 2. So I'm going to read the two phrases, and I want you to write in the chat whether you think number 1 or number 2 is more compelling to you. So it's really important because people need to have access to mental health resources. Or number 2, the 2019 study completed by Saeed and Gomez suggests that access to mental health resources increases an individual's capacity to cope with difficult circumstances. So if you could share in the chat.
We have a whole slew of number 2s rolling up, and I'd love to know why. So if you've picked number 2, why did you pick it? Okay, so, but of course it's longer, happy face. That's cute.
Longer.
It's more detailed. The claim is backed up. It cites accredited sources, credibility, contains viable data, so it's evidence-based. When sources are made available, it helps. It's more specific. Awesome.
Okay, yeah, and that's exactly it. So when you are telling your story, when you are developing your core narrative, one of the ways that you can tell a compelling story is to ensure that, I mean, you're telling your story and talking about your idea is really important. One of the ways that you can ensure that your story appears more valid, your idea appears more compelling, is to talk about the need for your particular idea, not just, so research can happen, you can cite an external study. You can also talk about your market research. You can also include a quote from one of the people that, one of your clients. That's also very compelling. So including that in an application is definitely also compelling. But I would also make sure that you're partnering it to show that other people as well think that and have proven that this is a need. So we live in a world where somehow external research by external bodies somehow gives proof that evidence is evidence-based. So you need to show evidence that the things that you are saying in your application are true. One of the ways to do that is to look at relevant sources. So I give that to you as a tip for showing rather than telling that there is value or need for your particular project. So what makes a compelling story? The folder that we've shared with you, and you should all have a connection to the Google folder. If you don't have connection to the Google folder, I think that Golnaz can share maybe the link in the chat.
So Bethany, we've already shared the link in the chat.
Okay. Oh.
And so everyone should have access. Thank you, Cole. He's just done it again on top of it. And also the link is in your email reminders from Eventbrite. If after this session you want to go back, and it's all there.
Okay, great. So I shared an example of a core narrative in the folder, and this is just one of the examples of a core narrative, and this is just a little chunk that I'm showing on a slide. It's hard to be able to show this. If we were in person, you'd have the whole thing in front of you and you could take a look at it. Just taking a look at this this statement of a community challenge. This is a rural community recreation project, and it increased access to technology for people with disabilities. And taking a look at this particular example, and what to me makes this a strong example is that it provides a context, it provides examples, so past experience, it provides evidence, so research and quotes from community members. So that's one of the things that I talked about is evidence. So evidence could come from an external source or from an internal source. It shows partnerships, and when you look at the full narrative, it also shows a big picture that's broken down into steps as well. And this is a really good, strong example of a core narrative. We were really fortunate to have Ryan actually share his application from the IRP, which was a successful application. And one of the things that I did was to pull out some pieces that I thought were really good from his application that was successful. Ryan, did you want to share a little bit about the project that was funded?
Sure. So yes, for those that don't know, the Afro Caribbean Business Network, we do work with entrepreneurs of African and Caribbean heritage. But what we were finding is that there was a trend of, one, entrepreneurs in our community that struggled with their marketing and their sales, and two, a lot of creatives in our community that were struggling to have a sustainable livelihood. So they're in the gig economy, not making enough, or they're making enough to kind of get by, but kind of are in survival mode. So what we put together is an application to create a social enterprise that would be this marketing agency. So we would go out, get contracts with bigger companies, and have campaigns that we can hire people in the creative industry in our network to execute, and then also be able to have subsidized marketing strategies and execution for the businesses in our community that need help with their marketing.
Thank you so much. So, so here's one part of the application. And so this is, please provide a short description of your organization's mission. And so here was the short, clear, concise statement. The Afro Caribbean Business Network Foundation was created to help entrepreneurs of African and Caribbean heritage to grow their business, to be leaders in unifying and educating African and Caribbean entrepreneurs to grow their businesses in a successful and sustainable way, helping to support businesses by increasing access to resources and increasing sales via business building workshops and joint ventures. So clear and concise. It's clear to me what the organization's mission is in this section. And so this I pulled one chunk from this piece here about what social, cultural, or environmental problem does or will your social purpose organization address or intend to address, and how. So Black men experience discrimination and a sense of displacement. These factors greatly affect their ability to become and retain employment. 1 in 5 Canadians will experience a mental health problem or illness every year, with a cost of well over $50 billion to our economy. The Mental Health Commission of Canada states with research-based evidence that ethnocultural groups need new approaches and greater involvement of communities and contribution from others who have lived experience of mental illness and challenges with expanded accessibility and services. A creative agency that empathizes and understands the cultural background of future participants lessens their mistrust of other service providers and employers. ACBN, Creative Works Agency, will aim to mobilize leadership, reduce disparities in risk factors that trigger to mental illness, and strengthen the knowledge of entrepreneurship, creative project management, rights, and culture. So, just based on looking at this now, what did I like? Why did I choose this particular example? What did I like about it? Just in the chat, why did I think that this was a good example?
And I'll read those out as they start coming in.
Yeah, sure.
Well, I can start us off while we wait for others to type in. I would say, wait, we've got statistics to back yourself.
Okay.
It clearly states what the organization aims at, evidence-based data.
Right.
You cited the MHC.
Yeah.
Incredibly concise, factual, well-informed. As a reader, I feel moved to support this cause. Problem linked to purpose. Target audience. Target audience, strong verbiage, answers the question in an organized way. And this is a snippet, right, of the response? Or was there more?
There was
more. Okay.
Yeah.
But what they're reading, it's concise and it's organized is the feedback. All right, awesome.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and I yes, good job. Yeah, I agree. So this is a very good example. I can only give little pieces here when we're working on this together. I would agree. All of those things are true. So, and then what primary information gap are you hoping to fill, or what skill or competency do you hope to acquire through the Investment Readiness Program? And then this piece here, so a marketing strategy will develop a clear idea related to our client's business goals and objectives with an outline, short and long-term objectives while defining our specific marketing message. Developing a mission statement is the foundation of any marketing plan, although it may not play a direct role in marketing activities. We have a target market. So once again, this is very clear and concise and very direct in terms of thinking about the primary information gap or skill competency. And it's talking about what they're planning to do, and it's very clear how they are planning to move forward in terms of answering that question. And in all of these examples, there was a clear answering of, and this is also once again one piece of the question that was answered as well. And so one thing that's really important is knowing your audience. So your audience is going to change each time that you complete a funding application or that you engage in a fundraising activity. And I think that that's why it's really important to have a core story. You may want to keep the facts of your story, but you're going to tell those facts in a different way depending on the funding criteria and or the audience. One of my favorite 19th century poets, Emily Dickinson, said, "Tell the truth, but tell it slant." So you're always going to tell the truth, but the way that you tell that truth and the way that you is going to change depending on what your funder is asking and how they are asking the question. Okay, so one of the things that I'm going to invite you to do as you are thinking about your own story is in that same Google folder, there is a core narrative worksheet that has all of the different areas that I have seen on any funding application that you would ever. I developed this. It's a very simple. You're filling in text boxes and including it on a text box. But what I will invite you to do, and this is not something that you're going to have time to do right now, but I'm going to invite you to start writing your own core narrative. And maybe you've already got a narrative. Maybe you've competed in a philanthropy pitch, or maybe you've written a couple of grant proposals. Maybe you've got great ideas and you're just wondering how to tell your story. No matter where you're starting, there's always room to improve and always a way to tell your story more effectively. And so this, you may have also, at this point, you may be thinking very specifically about the IRP and specifically about that application. And so maybe you want to concentrate on answering those questions right now, and that's okay. But I would encourage you to work on a core narrative, work on your core narrative, because if you have a core narrative, it makes writing your each grant application easier because I think it was Crystal that I was talking to, you're always able to draw from that core narrative so that you're not always having to reinvent the wheel, because every funding application is a little bit different. And so it can actually become very fatiguing to always have to reinvent the wheel with each new funding application. And so if you have a core narrative, you can pull out the pieces that you need from that core narrative, and then you can use them to answer the question specifically in the way that the funder is, in a way that is appropriate for the funder that you are applying for. And so you'll see that in addition to the blank narrative worksheet, There is also another sheet that actually speaks to each of the different areas. So there's an area for your project title, thinking about the context. So thinking about what others need to know to get a clear picture of the value of your project or idea. Your mission, what are you doing? Why are you doing what you're doing and for what purpose? Your target population. And when you've actually finished your narrative, write a summary, 150 words capturing the key points. And to that point, you could easily pull a couple of sentences for that for the IRP or another funding application.
So Bethany, Crystal has just summarized one key takeaway for me is that the core narrative should be your complete enough narrative.
Right. It should be everything. It should be, and you can put everything there and not worry about, you don't have to worry about leaving anything out of the core narrative. You want to tell a good story, but then you can pull pieces out for the different, and it may be that you are actually applying for a piece of a project with a particular funding, proposal, because there are some pieces, there's some funding proposals where maybe there is one piece of it, one piece of your project that you can apply for. That happens, that it may be that if you position your project a particular way, you'll be eligible for some kind of funding, but you can still pull it out of the core narrative. So that's great. Yes, absolutely, Crystal. That's absolutely. I'm glad that's a takeaway for you. So you want to think about the challenge that you're facing, that your project or idea is seeking to solve. That's often a question that ends up in a funding application. A description of the community that you're working with, and that's different than your target population. It's broader. Who else might be involved? It could include also other stakeholders. It could be a physical or geographical community, an interest community, a virtual community, an analysis of the problem or challenge. So the root issue, the possible solutions, how will your project or idea contribute to solving the issue? And that's where you would actually put your research. Your project vision and mission, and your project stakeholders. What different groups are you partnered with? Who are you working with? And your project phases. And really, this is really just the beginning. So this week, I really encourage you to work on your core narrative and to fill in as much of your story as you can. And it may feel like a big job, but don't worry, this is really just a process that you're going to continue to build on. And next week, we're going to look at developing a work plan and developing a budget and how all of these pieces fit together. Because the work plan and the budget are a continuation of your story. But until you actually have a good core narrative, it's really hard to develop a good work plan and a good budget. And those work plans and those budgets are something that is required of almost every grant proposal as well.
Bethany, there's a couple of comments.
Yeah,
for
sure.
Both you and Ryan, I'll read them out.
Yeah,
and Sneha as well. There are a few questions where we might have to end up repeating the information. Does that not make it uninteresting to read for the funder?
So questions in the core narrative?
It doesn't say. So Soumya, maybe you can, I know your sound isn't working, so if you can maybe be a little bit more clear, is it the core narrative you're speaking to, or is it that you find in responding to various questions in the application, you're finding that you're having to repeat some of the information? So we'll wait for that clarification. Then we have a question from Ralph. Do you have a comment on grant writers or funding research companies?
So grant writing companies?
It says funding research companies. I'm not sure what that is, but do you have a comment on grant writers or funding research companies? And Ralph, perhaps you can clarify what you mean by funding research companies. So maybe if you can comment on grant writers.
If it's company to just do research on grants that are available, stay away from that.
Yeah.
I would say, because even with grant writers, that's why it's so important that you're here. And that's why I asked, like, is this your first time writing a grant? Because now having guidance through writing your grant, you're going to be able to use this for additional grants in the future. But what I did is hire a grant writer when I was working on my first one. And then I made sure that they worked on a very difficult one. And then that became the blueprint that I used for every single other grant that I wrote going forward, where you didn't need to hire a grant writer again.
And so that's one approach that has worked for Ryan. Do others want to add anything? Bethany, maybe from your experience, anything to add?
Sure. And I mean, you can certainly, I mean, hiring a grant writer is something that you can absolutely do. There are people who have careers as grant writers. I would say that you want to make sure that you are communicating clearly with them about what you what your expectations are. You would want to make sure that they know the type of grant that you're applying for, because there are lots of different types of grants, and you would want someone to have experience as well as relationships developed in the field where you are also because having a grant writer is one thing, but it doesn't mean that you're off the hook. So you can have someone do the writing piece, but you still have to do a lot of the work. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and because they won't have your flavor too. So it's beautiful what Bethany has provided, because get all of what you can out of your head and with your passion and into this document. Do your best with actually putting it to the questions of the grant itself. And then at best, have somebody look it over. Like if you know a grant writer, get them to edit it, just like with lawyers too.
Right.
Do as best you can and then get them to review it. It's a lot cheaper.
Right.
But again, if you want to go in depth, typically you're going to pay a lot for somebody to do it all for you. But do as much of it as you can by yourself.
Yeah. And
with your team.
Yeah. And I do think that there are, I know that there are companies out there that will look for grants, like look for funding opportunities for you. I would proceed with caution. I would actually want to know that I would want to talk to someone who had been successful with those companies before I put my money out there, is what I would say.
Thank you. We have Bhairavi wants to clarify about the core narrative for a project versus the overall venture or organization. So Bhairavi, I'm going to pass it on to you if you'd like to use your mic to ask the question.
Sure. Thanks. Yeah, so I think in just listening on your suggestions of, how to fill out that core narrative form and putting in all the value of everything that we are aiming for and stuff, I think I'm still a bit confused of how to separate it as this is the venture's goal and the core narrative is almost often, I guess in my case, about the venture. And then there is the specifics of a particular project that taps into part of that core narrative. But in this instance, the project has little offsets of its own core narratives, right? So I think that's where I'm a bit confused, or also maybe a bit anxious of how much there is to write.
Okay, sure. So then I would actually just do two forms. Like I would want to tell the story of your venture, but then I would pull off the project. And talk specifically about your project. So if you look on the second page, so you can tell the story of your venture, but then think about your particular project narrative. So you might want to do a second core narrative for your project. If your project is an a small offshoot of your core venture, if that makes sense.
Sneha, do you have anything to add to that question as well? So
Yeah,
The question is
so-
clarifying core
That's a
narrative
great
for a project.
question.
It is a great question. Core narrative for a specific project or idea versus the overall organization. So one thing I took away was, first, make sure you read the question very carefully.
Right.
Yeah.
And what it's asking. Is it asking about the organization or venture, or is it asking about the project?
Yeah.
But over to you, Sneha.
I would also say that the project is time defined. So there is there's a start date and there's an end date to your project. So that could help in creating that narrative, because you're essentially saying, what do I want to complete in this time frame? So if you're able to provide timelines, phase 1 in the first 2 to 3 months, we'll do this, phase 2, we'll do that, phase 3, we'll do the next thing. And you're right, it should come from your organization. Like, your project shouldn't be so disjointed from your organization that it doesn't make sense. But it's an opportunity to get into the details of this specific project that you're going to do and how it will move your greater organization forward.
Yeah. And so you want to talk about, I would say that too. And I think next week might be more clarifying for you as well, when we actually talk about a work plan, because you don't have a work plan for your you probably have a work plan for your venture, but a work plan for a project is very time bound. And a budget for a project is also time bound. And so, but you need to separate out what you're doing for a project when you're applying for funding.
Okay,
So
thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Bethany, we have about 5 minutes left. Yeah. So I want to make sure that we finish your piece.
Yeah. So I think the last little piece that I think, are there more questions? Golnaz?
There is one more. So it's very specific to the IRP, and it's from Chris. If you use the IRP to create a minimum viable product, where on the IRP application would you talk about marketing and sales? And I might even, in the interest of time, Chris, Sneha, would it be appropriate for Chris to connect with you directly on that?
Yeah, for sure. Chris, I can email you and we can set up a time to chat as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay.
And I think Sneha has shared her email as well, Chris, if you scroll a little bit higher up, and I'm sure she'll pop it into the chat again. So over to Bethany.
Yeah, and so I think that one of the things that that I did in July was to just put together a few things just around fundraising in the age of COVID-19, and this is just a couple of things just around looking at this idea of, we can't relate to people in exactly the same way. How can you connect to what people are concerned with, and how does your idea meet current needs? And thinking about what new possibilities are opened, and what are the new possibilities for you, and thinking about the fact that you have a more captive audience, and there are more possibilities, and the fact that virtual events can be really compelling. And so there was just some really great articles about, and so I'm not going to spend any time on this, but I just wanted to point out to you that there's a number of resources that I've included just at the end of the PowerPoint. And you may find it interesting and exciting to read some of these articles that I've included at the end, just around some of the possibilities that have opened up in the age of COVID-19. It's definitely created some restrictions for us, but it's also created possibilities. And what kinds of possibilities has it opened up, and how can you be a part of the solution as well? So that was just one last piece.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you. If we could unshare your slides, Bethany, we just wanted to show the dates for our upcoming sessions, and maybe quickly speak to how you and Ryan will be running the first working group that's coming up. Okay. So we do have a comment from a few people saying, that's amazing. Thank you. Wow. Thank you for all the information. I was very well informed before, and you have opened my eyes. Amazing. Thank you so much for the feedback all. So we have a number of sessions coming up, and I just wanted to break it down so that everyone's clear on what's happening over the next week or two. On September 23rd at 5 o'clock, as well as October 1st at 5 o'clock, we have working groups with Sneha there, with Bethany there, and with Ryan there. These are working groups where you will have an opportunity to engage more informally and engage in questions to do with the IRP specifically and your application. So after this session, we will be sending out a form that Ryan and Bethany have put together. We're not sure of how many of you will be joining the working group. So Bethany and Ryan, can you speak to kind of the form and what we'll be sending out and how you will be approaching the working groups with the information that people provide?
Yeah, sure. We did a lot of thinking about how we could do this really effectively. So it's not actually feasible for us to actually review all of everyone's applications, and because it's going to be virtual, we decided that we would get you actually to fill out a Google form. So you'll actually get a form, and we're going to invite you to choose 2 target areas. You'll get to just kind of check off, here are 2 areas that I'm finding challenging in putting together the IRP application. And you'll even have a chance to kind of copy and paste 2 areas, like from your application if you'd like. And we'll actually review those forms that you submit. And then when we come together, the 3 of us will respond to some of the themes that we see emerging, and we'll be able to follow up directly with people on their applications as well.
Okay, so please, if you haven't registered for the September 23rd working group, please make sure to do it. So Cole has posted the link to our events page. You're going to go to that session and register to make sure that you receive the form that Bethany just spoke to. So if you could do that right away, that would be awesome. Next week on September 24th, we're running the second part to the webinar series. And that is where Bethany and Ryan will focus more specifically on budget, as well as your work plan or project plan. Did I articulate that accurately, you two? Awesome. So those are the events related to the IRP and fundraising and grant writing coming up. So make sure that if you're interested that you register for all 3, September 23rd, 24th for the webinar, and October 1st for the second working group. All right, and if we can go to the next slide, just wrapping up, I wanted to, we've got Cole who's put the Eventbrite in there for you as well to make it super easy. So you just have to pick the date, and you do need to register 3 other times separately for each session. That's just how Eventbrite works. Cole, could you also share the link to our feedback form? So again, if you could please take a couple of minutes to fill out the feedback form for Bethany, Ryan, and myself to review any feedback you have. We will take your feedback and consider it for the September 24th session as well for part 2 of this webinar. So we value your input, helps us continually improve what we do to make sure it's of value to everyone. So that will be posted shortly. And again, on behalf of EDGE and our team, I'd like to thank Bethany and Ryan. Thank you so much. You have really great chemistry together. Love the teamwork and the back and forth. It was awesome. I'd like to thank Sneha for joining us as well and sharing insights about the IRP. And of course, our members and community for your loyalty and showing up for all of our sessions and being so engaged and giving your input. Cole, do we have an opportunity to share the link for the feedback form? If you could, that would be awesome.
The feedback form's already there.
Oh, is it? Where is it? I didn't see it.
Sorry, they're one after another. I apologize.
You don't need to apologize whatsoever. Okay, it's there. It's the Google Doc, so it's the second link that's already there. If you could please launch that underneath the Eventbrite link, and take a couple of minutes, that would be awesome. And we won't keep you anymore. We're 3 minutes over. I want to thank everyone for being here. Have a wonderful night, and we'll see you hopefully on the 23rd. If not, hopefully on the 24th. We're here 2 days next week. Thank you so much. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Orlando. Thanks, everyone. We can stop recording.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of the night.
You too. Have a great night.